Are you curious about Gestalt language processing? You are not alone. Join me, Corinne Smoose, and speech therapy PD for our podcast, The Gestalt Get Together. Our episodes try to balance the enthusiasm and excitement about GLP and its associated intervention ideas, as well as a healthy dose of skepticism about how to understand and integrate this paradigm shift into your career and the field at large. We hope that you can get together with us to learn more about Gestalts.
Welcome to Brainstorms, Functional Neuro Rehab for SLPs, presented by SpeechTherapyPD.com. This podcast is designed for the adult medical speech-language pathologist. Most of our audience members work in settings such as acute care hospitals, private practice, outpatient hospital clinics, and inpatient rehabilitation hospitals. Each episode has an accompanying audio course on SpeechTherapyPD.com and is available for 0.1 ASHA CEUs. The content of this course is based on the research and experience of the presenters. The listener is responsible for researching to determine if the information and skills taught are appropriate for their clients, students, or patients. SpeechTherapyPD.com does not necessarily endorse, recommend, or favor the information shared, nor any of the claims, opinions, statements, offers, or services made by the presenter. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Renee Garrett, and I am your SpeechTherapyPD.com podcast host for Brainstorms, Functional Neuro Rehab for SLPs. Before we get started, we have a few items to alert you to. Each episode is 60 minutes and will be offered for 0.1 ASHA CEUs. Here are the financial and non-financial disclosures. Financial disclosure for Casey Lewis is that she owns TexScope LLC and the copyright for NICU oral feeding algorithm and Casey for babies. Casey is also employed by HCA Healthcare, where she has led the NICU's therapy team and therapy initiatives. She receives compensation for this presentation from SpeechTherapyPD.com. Her non-financial disclosure is she is a board member of Neonatal Therapy Certification Board. My financial disclosures are I'm a paid employee of a private consulting firm in the Commonwealth of Virginia, as well as an adjunct faculty member of James Madison University and Old Dominion University. As the host of this podcast and other webinars on SpeechTherapyPD.com, I do receive financial reimbursement. My non-financial disclosure is that I am the secretary for the Communication Disorders Foundation of Virginia. Now, without further ado, we welcome Casey Lewis. Casey is a speech-language pathologist based in Dallas, Texas. She owns and operates TexScope, a mobile endoscopy company serving numerous Texas healthcare organizations. Casey's specialties include dysphagia across the lifespan, as well as neonatal care. Casey is currently serving as an expert witness in a legal case representing expertise in neonatal dysphagia. Most recently, Casey became a NICU mom herself in 2023 after experiencing a placental abruption. Casey's experiencing of transitioning from clinician to caregiver in a space where she has built her career has strengthened her heart for advocacy, specifically in the fragile environment of the NICU. And I want to go back and just say Casey Lewis, MSCCC, SLP, CNT, NTMTC. Welcome, Casey. And I don't know what that NTMTC stands for, so please share.
Hi, so I'm Casey Lewis. NTMTC is Neonatal Therapy Touch and Massage Certification. So it's in the neonatal space.
Very cool.
Yes, it's a long one.
Well, welcome. Good to see you. It's been far too long.
Yes, thank you for having me. So I'm here today to discuss my experience and journey of owning a business while keeping my foot in the door in the hospital setting. And it's been a long journey, to be honest with you. I started TexScope in 2019. And back then I wasn't a mother at the time. And I was working at times 80, 85-hour weeks to build my business. And I think sometimes it might not appear like that to the naked eye, because maybe we assume things, but there's a lot of work, especially in the niche space that I'm in with swallowing diagnostics, to build the business, because I have to build credibility, which takes time. And I think also I had to build credibility within my own body, like to feel credible of myself. And that took time, because I remember when I was first starting TexScope, I was advertising the service and I knew I was very good at it, but it's hard to sell something when sometimes you're still questioning yourself. And I think that's very important to understand if you're looking to grow your own business, or if you have your own business yourself, you really have to be true to yourself and feel very confident in your own skin, and just know that takes time, and just be kind to yourself. I don't think I truly felt like truly confident in my own skin and marketing TexScope maybe 2 to 3 years ago. And it was also marketing TexScope through COVID. And that's a different long story, but I had the option to either give up with the pandemic or to keep going, because again, I started my business in July 2019.
Oh my gosh. I think so many of us too had this whole 2019, we were killing it, right? We were just doing all the things and stuff and really feeling like we were taking off in so many aspects. And it was really, like you mentioned, it was really a sink or swim situation for a lot of people, especially those of us who were in healthcare, because we really didn't have a lot of options as far as being able to stay home. And even like for me, I was in acute care, so there was no telehealth. It was going into all the scary places and unknowns, and just a lot of that. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you and just kind of mention was that I find it really interesting that you went from NICU to TexScope, because it kind of seems like there's a divide, and I don't think that's truly the case. Because I'm thinking, like, in my own clinician mindset, that who better qualified to kind of cross practice setting from this really niche area that you mentioned of NICU to adult dysphagia, because you've got that foundational knowledge of dysphagia and what that looks like. But can you kind of talk us through, like, how did that sort of come to be, and how did you make that connection? Because it wasn't really a transition, I don't think. I think it was more of a connection.
Well, I have experience in both realms. I started my career with adults, and I started in the skilled nursing setting. I didn't have proper access to instrumentation, and the access that I had, I didn't agree with the clinical mindset of that provider. And so I knew back in 2014, and back then, is I wanted to grow a mobile endoscopy company, but that wasn't, fees wasn't very well known even back then, and still it's growing in knowledge. But I always knew I wanted to do that. But I always knew I wanted NICU. And so I remember questioning myself for years, like, how is it possible for me to do both? And I remember my business mentor at some point in my trajectory, I questioned myself so much, because I almost felt like fraudulent to some extent. Like, how can I do both things? And she looked at me, she was like, Casey, you can do whatever you want. Like, no one tells you what you can and can't do. That's yourself. And that kind of opened my eyes and mind to knowing I can do both. And so with that, I was working full time in the hospital setting. That was, 3 years or so after I went to the skilled nursing setting, home health, the public school system. And then I landed a job splitting my time in adult acute care and ICU, as well as in NICU. And then I advocated so much for a full-time role in the NICU that I weaned the adults and kept the full-time NICU. And with that, I was kind of living my dream, full-time NICU with swallowing diagnostics. And so that is one reason I stayed in the hospital setting, is because I was like really growing my NICU career while growing TexScope. Like I couldn't say no to the NICU, because it's my heart in a different way. And I felt really good at it. And I think I am good at it. And I think that's important to know about yourself, is if you feel like you're good at something, it's okay to say that. and like say, I'm really good at this and I really enjoy it. And don't feel like weird saying that. And so I think I'm saying that, saying these things because I felt those things. But and another reason I stayed in the hospital setting was because I was learning a lot about navigating the pandemic, and infection control and problem solving, and learning from that and then bringing that in to my business and marketing my business with understanding the importance of infection control. Like that's oddly something I really enjoy is like quality control and infection control, which is paramount when you're doing fees. So that's kind of where that came from. I hope that makes sense.
Oh yeah, no. And let's just back up some street cred for a whole second because copyright owner NICU oral feeding algorithm, I think you can toot your own horn. I'm just gonna say I think it's okay for you to do that.
Yeah, thank you.
And I know that's sort of off. It's not really off topic to me because I think it's part of the journey and part of the story. So can you kind of talk about how that came to be?
The NICU oral feeding algorithm. So yes. So as I was trying to, grow my business and even learn how to operate a business, first of all, that's totally different than growing a business. You have to know the foundations. I was seeing a problem within the NICU space that there wasn't, specifically in the NICU that I worked in, there was nothing to guide clinical decision making with eating, with feeding in fragile infants. And if you've ever been in the NICU or you've had a NICU baby, you probably know what I'm talking about. It's quite abstract and often based on clinical attitudes or clinical opinions rather than data or best practice. I mean, I'm cautious to say that, but it is true in my clinical experience. And so my husband works in quality. He's also a combat veteran. So I feel like I've also learned from him how to be a little bit more concise with my thinking, and kind of make things A to B, B to C. And so I developed an algorithm to help guide clinical decision making. And also the point of it initially was to have a way to speak to providers quickly, directly, and obviously be concise and give them a score of where the baby falls that day. And obviously the score indicates something on the algorithm. And so it helps build credibility within the neonatology team to understand the importance of speech language pathology services in the neonatal intensive care unit, because oftentimes in that setting, we can be a consult model of care, meaning you're waiting for something to go wrong and then you refer, which is not best practice at all. I totally disagree with that 100%. And I'm actually extremely passionate about that. But, it used to be that respectfully, a registered nurse could guide clinical decision-making with feeding. And so that's still a debated topic in the profession within the neonatal space. But I'm really passionate about getting the expertise of someone with clinical knowledge of dysphagia to help guide best practice for these babies to help them eat safely and get home safely.
Yeah, I mean that's fantastic and definitely potential to like grow into something else and so I'm excited to see what you do in the future with that.
Yes. And something else, I've learned is I like research. But I also research can also be quality improvement projects, and so know that. I think the term research, I in my head I hear PhD for some reason, and I don't have a PhD, but I can certainly do a quality improvement project, and so can you. And I encourage you to do so. If you see even a small problem that you perceive as small could be a large issue to someone else, and you could present that data to your leadership team or whatever setting you're in. And then also you could present that data at national platforms to help other people learn, because that's how we learn from each other. And really, that's one way I've grown at my career is by doing that. And also growing my network is by doing that. So I just want to empower you if you are passionate about any of those things to do so. And also what it does is it helps your leadership team, whatever that looks like in your space, have more respect for you and understand what you do. Because I would say the majority of the time, people don't know what we do and why we're there.
Well, I think you brought up some really great points, because one of the big things, especially if you're in like a member of the rounding team or you're the stand-in for whoever usually is on the rounding team, is being concise, going in with confidence and being concise in what you're presenting, because no one wants a creative writing tale when you're in the middle, especially if you're, like for me, I would be in ICU, not NICU, but in that space, because things happen so quickly and can go astray so quickly. Rounds has to be pretty concise and succinct, and no one wants to hear your 14-page creative writing story with all your beautiful vocabulary.
You might be disinvited to rounds, honestly.
Seriously. No, or you get everybody sees you coming and they're like,
right.
Make the eye rolls and all the things.
I know it's really true, but I've also seen some of my colleagues be perceived in that manner. I always say, when you know better, you do better. But I try to live by the motto that Brene Brown says, being clear is being kind. It's a form of kindness. And as a woman, sometimes it's been perceived in my career when I'm being clear, maybe it's direct and maybe that's a little forward. But in reality, I'm just being clear and getting to the point and being respectful of your time. So
yeah. I told a story, and I don't think I told it on here. Maybe I did, but when years ago, when we went in the hospital, we went to the what's called SBAR format for they use it for reporting like critical lab values or like a big incident or something like that, but it's situation, background, assessment, recommendations. So at the time I think I just finished my CF, so this was quite a while ago. But we were instructed that if we were sending an email that was more technical or critical in nature, critical meaning critical information, not critical as in critical of another human, critical information, that we needed to try to use that format as much as possible, because it does promote being succinct and getting to the point, being direct, all those things. And so I wrote this email, and I didn't write the SBAR part, but what I did was like a little blurb for each, like I separated it by paragraph. And the next thing you know, my office phone rang, and I got summoned to my boss's office because she thought I was being a smarty pants. She didn't use those words. She used the other words. And so I said, no, actually, I was writing it in the format that was suggested to us at our staff meeting. And she was like, oh. And so, yeah, it's interesting, because I think when you're a female, sometimes it can be perceived as you're being snide or abrupt. I've gotten that before. You're abrupt in the way that you write. No, I just am technical in the way that I write. So again, I leave the creative writing part out, and I just get to the point. But, again, we're the communication experts. And so I think when we are able to explain it that way and say, oh, well, this is why I wrote it in this way, or this is why I communicated it in this way, and having that algorithm to back it up, or that other piece of, like for us do modified barium swallows using like penetration aspiration scale, and being able to give that number and that solid data, even though it's really not as concrete as it seems sometimes, it still communicates what you need to communicate without being overly fluffy,
right,
in your efforts. So,
right. I'm actually sorry you experienced that. Like I feel like that frustrates me a little bit. I understand it's all a learning experience, but it can be challenging to navigate lots of different personalities, especially in an intensive care unit where emotions are heightened, time is heightened. People are stressed without even maybe even knowing they're stressed, because healthcare is hard, just to be honest with you. But you are not alone in that experience. It's probably happened to more people than would say,
Well, and even thinking on if you're the participant and you're listening to another person in something like rounding, or even like if you've gone to both hospital systems I work for do stroke symposiums or different research initiatives, and you go to those things, what are you drawn to as the listener or the participant? You're not probably drawn to the person who maybe they give one anecdotal story and you're into it, but if it's nothing but that and it doesn't have the research and it doesn't sound like the person is the resident expert, I don't tend to be as engaged. I tend to sort of like zone off into Renee land and going through my checklist of what I need to do when I get home or what have you. So I think that speaks to most people and what their expectation is when you're communicating the things that you need to communicate. But, you mentioned another thing that I thought was really important is learning how to run a business while you're still being a full-time employee. Were there certain things that you did as far as like any kind of coursework? Was it sort of like trial by fire? I know you mentioned that you had a business mentor.
Yes, I invested in a business mentor before I filed for my LLC. And I found that to be very necessary. And I'm really glad I did that because I would have been more at risk of failing. And I believe in financially investing in people or in an experience if you're trying to get to an outcome quicker and more successfully, especially obviously doing so with someone who is experienced and seasoned and has the track record to prove that success. And I continue to invest in business mentors down the line. And it's always kind of a season of trying to find out who's right for me and where I am. And obviously, like right now, I don't have a business mentor because I have a baby. And so it's a lot of learning how to manage my time while growing my business. And also when you are a business owner, there are really a limited time of days off, but I have full autonomy in my schedule. I am not full-time in the hospital anymore. I think being a mom, I've taken a step back and I've appreciated, like, this is why I invested 4 years of my time prior to get to this point, to have full autonomy in my schedule and to do what I built TexScope for. I built it to have a quick turnaround of swallowing diagnostics. So like, I'm going to leave this house tomorrow at 4:30 or 5 a.m. so I can go do a fees. That's an hour and a half away. So I can get back in time to care for my baby. And that's kind of what I do. I do a lot of that. And then I have an in-service tomorrow at 1 p.m., an hour away the other direction. And it's wild. It really is, but I love it. I actually thrive on it because I really enjoy being my own boss and making my own decisions. And I think that can be a challenging part once you get to a certain season in your business growth and being a business owner is I like to make my decisions quickly and move forward. When you're employed by someone else, decisions can't be made very quickly. There's generally a lot of red tape unless you have a lot of autonomy in your position. I did with one of my bosses, which I have so much respect for that season in my life and her leadership. But that is almost a frustration for me now. And I see opportunities for improvement with my naked eye in a way I never did before. And it's hard because I just want to change things so quickly when I'm employed by someone else in the hospital setting, but I can't.
Oh, I know how that feels. That's how I felt in outpatient when I went and started the new adult outpatient program and we changed managers. And, my thought process when I went was this location is it's close to my home. So this is my community. We had the opportunity to not only be able to implement modified barium because we had a fluoro suite that was unused, but we also had the opportunity to do fees because I've been doing fees since 2011. We just needed the equipment, which, nowadays, come on, it's expensive. I get it, but it's a capital budget item when you work for a health system. It's really, compared to the other equipment they buy, it's like no sweat. And I had all the data because we'd already done that at the acute care hospital. We had already gone through all that, done the proposal and done all that. So I already had all that stuff. It was a matter of getting the leaders to buy in because it was a different set of leaders. And of course, none of that it would have been years. I probably would have been dead, honestly, before they would have signed on to any of that stuff. So that resonates with me so much, because now the firm that I work for, it's like the stuff that some of our team asked for, we kind of all laugh, because one of the PTs that I share an office with wanted a standing desk. And she was like, I'll probably have to wind up buying it myself. And, I'm going to run it by our boss and just see what she says. And the CEO was like, yeah, we actually have a spare, but I can get you a new one if you want. And we were both like, what? Say what? So it is nice to see, because she owns the business. Our boss owns the business. So she's it's far less convincing, because she already gets it. So it's kind of nice to have that. It's not as autonomous as owning your own business, as far as like me owning a business, but it's more autonomous in that I can say, hey, sounds like a good idea. And she's like, yeah, it sounds like a good idea to me too. Let's do this.
That's awesome. Sounds like a
Yeah.
much happier environment.
Yeah. I keep waiting for something weird to happen, but so far,
Right.
like, are you sure?
Right.
But
You're questioning it. Don't question it. It sounds good.
I'm going to ride the wave. That's what I'm going to do.
Right.
Yeah. What would you say, or other than the business mentor, did you have, or do you recommend? Because I had Jen Ruckner on, who owns a private practice up in Northern Virginia, when I'm in the east part of Virginia, and she had some people that she thought were really integral in her inception of her private practice. Do you have people other than a business mentor that you think are really integral parts of what you need to be successful, or what you need to sort of navigate those pieces that maybe most people aren't really well versed in?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. I think, because I'm almost on year 5 now in July. And so I feel like I'm looking at my business with a different lens. And a lot of it, to be honest with you, is very fuzzy in my memories. I don't remember, because I was in a survival mode with it while trying to grow my career in the NICU. But I believe in trying to get involved in like masterminds or small groups. And obviously a lot of those things are an investment. And so I would have to grow my business to get to a point to say, okay, I'm going to invest in this now. And so it would kind of be like data points on my trajectory to be like, okay, I'm going to do this now. But you always have to keep investing in yourself or investing in your business to grow, or you're just going to be stagnant. And maybe there are seasons where you just want to operate your business how it is. Like when I was pregnant, there was a time, like a season where I didn't want to grow at that time. I was just trying to be pregnant and get through my pregnancy. But now that I'm postpartum, quickly postpartum, I was back to growing my business. But through those masterminds or small groups, I formed different relationships, and you'll find as you continue to grow, and even as you grow as a business owner, some people are there for a season and then they don't keep going with you. And there's been quite a few people like that on my journey. And I think there's probably like that in anyone's life, but really as a business owner. And I think it's important for, sometimes as women, and I don't want to, I guess, classify us in a box, but I would say throughout my career, people maybe have been threatened by, the growth that I've had, or the directness that I have, but in reality, it's such value added. And so I hope you can, if you have a strong personality, sometimes I have a strong personality, try to see yourself as value added. And try to, mesh that into wherever you're employed while you're growing your business, if that's a goal for you. But at the end of the day, I hope and encourage you that you'll invest most of your time and energy into your business rather than to your employer, because that's the point of owning a business. It's generally not just something that you're just doing on the side. The point of it is to grow it. And I had a battle with that in my own mind for a while, because I felt like, how can I be employed somewhere and grow a business? Is this like wrong? No, you can do it. I mean, when I started my business, I respectfully, I never signed anything with my employer that said it wasn't like a non-compete or something, but I did let my boss know what I was doing out of respect. And that was fine. And I believe in having those conversations and being transparent. So someone, doesn't feel put off or that you did something maybe behind their back. And really, you can still do what you want, but it's really important to maintain respect with that employer if you're growing a business as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's good because I know when I first started teaching, I kind of felt like, and at the time I had because, being in the health system for as long as I was at the same health system for 11 years, you have multiple layers of leadership and supervisors. And so I did. And so when when I first started teaching adjunct, I wound up, I'm constructing my schedule that way because I was flexi. So I had some not full autonomy over my schedule, but I could say I'm available this day from this time to this time. And as long as I met my flexi benefit or flexi employee requirements, no one ever really said anything about it. But when I started teaching adjunct, that was a conversation she wanted to have was, well, I don't want that impacting your ability to provide patient care. And I'm just like, well, why would it? It's two different things.
That's
And
right.
so it's kind of funny that depending on who your your leader is, you sometimes have to really advocate and, it's almost like you feel like you're a kid at the principal's office. You're like, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to step on your toes, but you're not doing anything wrong. It's okay.
Are you taking advantage of our new amazing feature? The certificate tracker. The free CE tracker allows you to keep track of all of your CEUs, whether they are earned with us at speechtherapypd.com or through another provider. Simply upload your certificate to your registered account and you're all set. So come join the fastest growing CE provider, speechtherapypd.com.
To delve into those different arenas because like you, and again, I'm backtracking to what you said earlier. That's how you grow and you learn, and you develop not only your clinical skill set, but your network. And so I kind of want to talk about the network piece a little bit because I talk about this a lot, when I speak, but also like with my students, I always say something along the lines of don't burn a bridge, because you never know where you're going to be. We think therapy is a huge, big world, but really, I mean, the intersectionality of some of the people that I've met, like even meeting you, like that was just so right.
I know.
In any other world, how does that even exist?
I know.
But that's happened to me so many times now that whether it's locally or, even at our state conference or at a conference like ASHA or other national conferences, I've met people that have wound up being, um, either someone I've worked with to present with at a webinar or someone I've presented with at a conference, or someone that I've invited to be a guest on the podcast. And so, let's what do you think about like networking and how did that all sort of play into like your whole trajectory of this moving from this one space to another to the business owner piece?
It is crucial to network and to be kind to people and to not burn a bridge. Like you said, it is crucial. I've always loved really connecting with people. I mean, I've always been that way. I don't really like being alone. I like being with friends, and that's just kind of my personality in general. But I knew the importance of joining my state organization per se. I would do that, or going to national conferences like ASHA, or in the neonatal space, there's NANT, which is the National Association of Neonatal Therapists. And now sometimes I go to multiple national conferences a year, or sometimes I just go to one. Like this year, I've only gone to one because I have a baby. But putting yourself out there shaking hands with people, say, hey, I'm Casey. Where are you from? Where do you work? Or if someone presents, and hang out after the presentation and ask them questions and be asked if you can exchange emails. Certainly if there's, if you learn something and you want to keep picking their brain and learning, I would say most of the time someone would be like, sure, send an email, because it's an honor to connect in that way as well. Like I've presented, and when someone wants to keep learning from me, it's flattering,
Mhm.
And so I think I encourage you to not be fearful of that. If that's kind of a fear for you, put yourself out there, volunteer. If you
Mhm.
have the time, volunteering is an investment of your time as well. But try to do that, especially as I've grown a business and I have service agreements with very robust institutions. And it's sometimes I'll take a step back. I'm like, I did that. I did that. I am not a large corporation, but I did that. And I think it goes back to the fact that people have to respect you initially to continue a conversation with you and believe you. You don't want to, if I'm selling my business, I don't like to sell my business. I just want to have a conversation and get to know their problems and say, hey, how are you doing today? What can I help you with?
Mhm.
But I really encourage you to get involved if you're not already in any organization that you enjoy or is meaningful for you, because it will lead you contacts across the country, but it will also, generally when you're volunteering, you're doing something really good for the profession and for your community.
Yeah, it's very fulfilling, and I definitely say that to my students, and I share that because I started as a communication science disorder student in NISLA, so the National Speech Language Hearing Association, and that's the way that I got to go to my first ASHA. Our NISLA was a national chapter, like we paid our national dues, and we made a donation to the ASH Foundation, and this was a long time ago, but we won some kind of lottery that they did back then. I don't know if that's still a thing, but we got 2 free registrations for our NISLA chapter, and I got to go represent our chapter, but I also got to go to ASHA as a student, which was incredible. I mean, it was definitely an overwhelming experience, but we went. We had one of our a lot of our professors were there, but one of my professors was like there with us, sort of like, I don't want to say babysitting because she didn't really do that, but sort of as our point person, because we were in New Orleans, and um, it was overwhelming. There's a lot of people at ASHA if
Mhm.
you've never been, but it started for me as a student. One of the other volunteer things that we did, I think I might have even been undergraduate when I did this, is our state organization back then, they gave out registration packets when you went to the state conference, and it had like your booklet with your your course listings and sponsors information, exhibit hall kind of stuff, map of the facility, whatever was in there. So we as students, one of my clinical instructors, she had us stuff those envelopes, and we got to go, because we had so many volunteer hours, we got to go to the state conference for free. So it seems like it's not like anybody can stuff a packet.
Mhm.
Anybody can stand in a hallway and say, here are where the student posters are. It doesn't have to be this grandiose, I'm going to be um, the president of the state organization or whatever. It can be, but you can start out really small in something that provides you an opportunity for that meaningful experience. Because it feels really good. But then again, like you mentioned, you meet a ton of people, which turns into a thing, which turns into another thing here, and it just sort of trickles out like a tree branch. You're here, and I have the person who was the president of NISLA is now a professor at the University of South Alabama, and I guest lecture there for her every year. So that started way back when. And it is such a good growth opportunity. Um, which leads me into the next thing, which is advocacy, because those volunteer roles, lean into advocacy, whether it's advocating for something that you believe in. Like a lot of my students volunteer for Operation Smile at the university level because it's something they are very interested in. One of them had the opportunity to go on a medical mission to Belize, and it's just like all these things have really spiraled and skyrocketed for her, which that's not what she got into it for and what she thought would happen. But when you start out with that sort of advocacy mindset, you're advocating for these other things and your patients and doing all this, but then you come back to it and you're advocating for yourself. And so that's sort of the next thing I wanted to talk about, was because you and I have talked about pay equity before, and how sort of there's a roadmap for advocating for desired salary. And it's something that we're sort of discouraged about. Don't tell so-and-so how much you make. I heard that so many times when I worked for the health system. I'm like, who cares?
Mhm.
Who cares? Why is it
You
a
have
big
the right to
deal?
exchange that information,
Yeah, it's
and
not
I
illegal.
think you'll hear that from HR. I've heard HR literally say, don't talk about it. And you have the right to talk about it. And it's very important that you do so. I remember when I was full-time at the hospital before I started TexScope, I led an initiative with the speech pathology team to present data to HR about, we're not getting paid appropriately. And I had information from the Bureau of Labor Statistics at the time. That was so long ago. But I also brought my certifications and also brought in the cost of living and for the area I was living in. And I will tell you, advocating for an increase in pay within a hospital system, it's quite challenging. But it's important you do it if you feel that you're not being paid appropriately, because that's the only way things are going to change. And I mean, honestly, you'll hear hospital systems increase their pay by like a quarter an hour. And I'm being serious. And I can't believe that, like, that makes me like almost nauseous. Like, as a business owner who I have autonomy now to grow my business and really make as much money as I want to, it kind of makes me feel, frustrated. But I want to encourage you to do so. Present data to your leadership and then ask for a meeting with HR. Because over time, if you keep doing that, they're very likely to try to increase your pay. Healthcare is a very robust and financially stable operation across this country. And so I always find it fascinating when you'll hear employers say, we can't give you a raise. I'm like, oh, you can't give me a raise. Okay. And I want to encourage you, if you're, continuing to present data, continuing to advocate for you, and they won't budge, it may be time to consider a different employer. And because there are other options out there. You can work in private practice, and generally, if you're in private practice, that employer is going to be more flexible or be able to listen to you to increase your pay, because they have autonomy over their business. But when you're in private practice and you own a private practice, you need your employer to stay, because generally a lot are the face of that company. So I just want to encourage you, if you are doing these things, it's not working, it's okay to look for something new. And, earlier in my career, that was hard for me to process. But I will say, now that I'm thinking about earlier in my career, for my CF Y to getting my Cs, I got $10 more an hour. And that I forgot I did that. That was back in 2014. And I wrote out, it was a 1-page paper. And I explained why I need this. I wasn't like, may I have? I said, I need, I wasn't asking, I was telling. And they gave me $10 more an hour, and I wasn't being paid terribly. So it worked. And I guess that's why I'm kind of bringing that up, because it's possible if you're with the right organization or with someone who has the ability to move that forward for you.
Yeah, I laugh because in outpatient, our regional manager got, our goal, of course, for productivity was 100%.
That's
Long as,
not,
and as long as
I'm
we,
laughing.
as long as we got to 100 as a department, he got his bonus. We didn't get anything. We didn't get a bonus. We got $0 an hour for that. And that used to just really grate my nerves because now I'm like you looking back, but now I know how that works. And so it really just grated my nerves because, well, you have to be productive. I'm like, what do you think I'm doing over here? You're not bringing revenue in. I am, and it was so frustrating because it was like, oh, here's your quarter an hour, literally. And he's getting this like 10% bonus of his salary, which I'm sure was ridiculous to begin with, while he's sitting around doing a lot of nothing. And I'm not saying that all leaders are like that, just the ones I had in the last place I was. And it was frustrating because the first thing that happened when I left, I had someone, the consulting firm I work for now, they called me to see if I was interested and then offered me more money than I made. I'd been there for 11 years. It was
Wow.
so funny to me. Like, it still makes me laugh because it's nice to see that there are people out there who value you, because it is, a lot of us, I think, are very loyal. The old model, like our parent, like at least my parents and my grandparents, is that they worked for the same company for 30, 40, 50 years. They got a pension when they retired. That almost never happens these days, depending on where you are. I know that the health system I was at did away with pensions for anyone who got hired after January 2019, which was really strange because that timing was so bizarre.
Mm-hmm.
So your pension would be your 401k or 403b or whatever you invested in yourself. And so those pensions have slowly kind of gone away. So it does make sense to be able to even use that as a leverage when you're looking at bargaining for more pay,
Mm-hmm.
because there is no, what's the benefit for, you staying somewhere long term other than, maybe you like it there, you have a great team, but if you're not being financially compensated for the time that you spend doing your job, and it's not fair compensation, I think those are big considerations, and that is tough. It's hard, right? It's really hard to take that leap of faith and sort of jump off that diving board into the employer pool, because I had someone say, well, it's the devil you know versus the devil you don't.
It is really hard, especially when it's very likely you have very strong relationships with your colleagues at work. And maybe it's not your friends or your colleagues, it's just the inability of the institution to increase your pay. I think it's important to discuss, like I think you mentioned, there's a package. And I felt very, I think looking back, I was naive to that. And so maybe if they won't increase your pay, they can, increase your matching and give you more PTO. And so there are things to get around if you're really wanting to stay somewhere. And generally, if you're employed at a large institution, it's very hard to change everything because it's a standardized answer for these kind of things. But that's why I really love small businesses and working for a small business, because you're generally able to have more say in the trajectory of your career rather than a corporate structure, I'm not a rigid person. And I don't want to say that in a negative light to my colleagues who are in the hospital system. I think I have the utmost respect for them, because it's very hard, especially when you're navigating this corporate structure and you really want to maybe get ahead, but there's there's no way for you to get ahead. Maybe I had a boss tell me at one point in my career that I am just a staff therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? That was fuel for me to get going with my business, because I'm not just a staff therapist. I am a therapist, and I do great things as a therapist, and so do you. And so try, if you ever have been told something like that, try to use it for the good rather than to wallow in sadness, because that could have very much hurt me.
Yeah. Yeah. I have another friend who said every time she had one of those meetings with her supervisor that was one of those disheartening or like you said, not necessarily sad, but just disheartening, I think is the best word for it, that it was fuel for her to go and say, okay, I have this thought in my mind that I want to launch my business eventually. So let's see what it looks like to get insurance certifications. How do I go about that? Let me learn about that while I'm fueled by this energy that was negative. I can turn it into a positive. How can I learn more about the business structure that I want, whether it's an LLC or a PLLC or whatever? What can I learn about that? Who do I need to have immediately for me to be successful or have like the appropriate guidance? Do I need an attorney, like a business attorney? Do I need a CPA or an accountant of some sort? And so it's funny because I see these crossover mindsets of people who have taken that leap of faith, whether it was changing to a different employer or starting their own business. And it's sort of that the same mentality of, okay, how can I switch this yucky thing that just happened into something good that's going to benefit me and ultimately my patients?
That's right. And your family,
Yeah.
right? And the life you want to have. Because I think it also goes back to whatever your core values are. And I think maybe sometimes that can change a little bit. But one of my core values is like freedom in my life. And obviously that led me to owning my own business. And I think it goes, I hope you know what your core values are, because it can guide you a lot just as a person, but as a clinician as well. I was curious, do people have questions? I don't see anything in the chat, but I wanted to encourage people to ask if they had anything. There's nothing.
No, everybody's so quiet.
I know we usually save questions to the end, but I just didn't see anything in the chat. I wanted to encourage that. If you have questions, so please ask.
Yeah, same. Please ask, because I'm still stuck on the feeding algorithm.
You make me laugh.
While we're talking about or waiting for questions to pop up, tell me about Casey for Babies, because I kind of know a little bit about this, but I don't think I know enough.
So I applied for that trademark. It's a trademark, and now it's a registered trademark during the pandemic. And it took years to process because you're working with the government. And I knew I wanted to have TexScope, but I wanted to grow my business, like my brand, working for myself in the neonatal space. And so that's something I'm working on growing. But Casey for Babies essentially is my brand regarding my expertise in the neonatal space, which, it's fascinating, that I've grown my knowledge so much, and I think people know what I do. People know that I have an expertise in babies, but I also specialize in swallowing diagnostics, because it goes back to the fact that an attorney pursued me from a different state and called me last year and asked if I would be an expert witness. He obviously explained the situation, and I can't disclose the details of the case, but it's such an honor for me to be able to use that expertise that I've developed in such a larger scale that it is having and will continue to have such a large impact. I think that goes back to, I would have probably never gotten to that point in my career if I didn't understand the importance of relationship building and networking, because that's the foundation. And maybe that's not a goal for you. But it's important at the end of the day to be kind to people. And I think for people to know what you do. And so that, like, even within your immediate hospital system, to network within the hospital system, like say, go to happy hours with them, or ask someone to go to lunch, or eat lunch with a colleague, a new friend. It can even start just in your immediate work environment. It doesn't have to be at like a national level or a state level.
Oh yeah, no, that's a good point. Because I know even for us, we had, especially during the pandemic, we had safety stand downs that were, I want to say daily, like 15 minutes, the first 15. And sometimes it didn't take 15 minutes, but it was like sort of the rundown of infection control type stuff and if there were any sentinel events, and how many days it had been since the last fall, how many days it had been since the last like surgical, I don't want to say mistake. That sounds terrible. They had a different word for it, but they had all these things that they were tracking that our quality control department tracked. And so they would run through that. And of course, for us as therapy, the big thing was like days since the last fall. But we also looked at things like safety initiatives or the ability for us to have a representative on like a wound care team or an ICU initiative. So they did some different research things that they were working on. There was a vitamin C protocol for infection progress at one point, and then there was a early mobility protocol that was being developed in our ICU that our one of our PTs and one of the OTs were on that team, and then we had a safety coach. So we had all these things that were, it was literally like a quick 10-15 minutes every day where we just ran through that, where we could all be together in that space. And it actually started before the pandemic. But what was funny is we all sort of like, we're like, oh crap, we got to go to safety. I'm in the middle of doing something. I got to stop. So I go to the stupid meeting. But then when the pandemic happened and we really weren't allowed to be together, it's like we look forward to that because we missed being around each other and being like, hey, how are you? How was your weekend? Your mom was here this weekend. How was your visit? Did you get to go to the zoo with your sister or whatever it was? And we missed that kind of stuff. So it is funny how it becomes this networking opportunity, but you're not thinking of it in that way. One of my very first guests on the podcast was actually my CF mentor, which was so full circle for me because she moved away years ago and we keep in touch, but it's like, random. I'll send her a message and be like, hey, I have this weird question about a patient, or, she's done the same thing a couple of times that, so it's not like a consistent, hey, how's your mom? Or, that kind of thing.
Right.
But it's still a network thing. It's like that friend that you haven't seen in 5 years and you get together and it's like you didn't skip a beat. It's like that.
Right.
And I think your network can be that way because what happened with that is she is a specialist now who owns her own private practice who specializes in Parkinson's treatment and therapy and swallowing. So it was really good because she was able to come on and share her knowledge and expertise on that topic, which is such a great topic to share on and talk about. So don't underestimate the power of that because it's not just about employment and who you might be interviewing or whatever. It's really more than that.
I mean, like I remember like when I was full-time in the hospital setting, I wanted to collaborate with RT really badly and to try to improve initiatives within, at that time I was split with ICU, adult acute care and NICU, but also like these patients who are being extubated and helping them advocate for us getting orders, or, the patients who are on very high levels of respiratory support. And then you can form a community together. And, if you're still living in the same area and they leave that hospital, you can text them or call them and be like, hey, do you know of any speech therapy openings? And so don't just stay within your silo of being a speech therapist.
Yeah, I always used to say, and especially in ICU, nurses were my best friends because that's who I went to for, they were there way more than I was. They're doing a 12-hour shift. I'm there for, 6 to 8 hours or whatever, depending on what I was working that day. But yes, I am a huge fan of respiratory therapy. I had the good fortune of, it didn't feel like good fortune when I was a new grad and I was forced to go to respiratory therapy.
Right.
But I now, and even earlier on in my career, I realize now how important that was to the holistic approach that I took on in my practice. And same thing with wound care rounds. It was as yucky as that can be because I'm not a wound care person. It was important for me to understand why that wound, how that related back to nutrition and how dysphagia became a part of that and that whole full circle picture. And so, I think that's a really great point because it can be as big or as small as as it is. It doesn't have to be anything crazy or grandiose. It can just be something that is your day to day that you don't even realize is a network, but it's a network.
Right. And never underestimate the power of bringing donuts to work. Feeding your friends.
We used to have a Panera bagel person who would bring Panera bagels and I'm like, oh, it's a migraine trigger, but I'm going to go for it.
Yeah, that's a nice gift. But I would do that specifically in the NICU because, and a lot of those nurses are some of my greatest friends, but those nurses can be very hard to budge and to get buy-in from. But yes, don't just stick within the scope of practice of being a speech therapist.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, as we're wrapping up, you all have just a couple of minutes to ask questions. I don't see anything in the chat or the Q&A. So if you have questions, speak now or forever hold your peace.
It's been fun. I hope you all have learned a lot. And if you have a passion or an idea of doing something on your own, go for it. But make sure that you are doing the groundwork before going for it in terms of understanding what that means of owning a business within your state, because every state is different.
Yes, that's very true. Even practice regulations are different. I had someone locally ask about our Department of Health and how they helped regulate insurance reimbursement. And I had to explain to them that that's not really a role of our Department of Health, that you need to look bigger at more, ASHA, like the legislative advocacy efforts that they're doing. And some states do have a state entity that also works on that. So that's good information to know as well. Well, I still don't see any questions, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up. But thank you so much, Casey, for joining us. We really appreciate you coming on. You just are such a wealth of knowledge, but also a ray of sunshine. So I really appreciate that.
I'm proud of you for doing this. This is amazing. Good for you.
Well, I'm proud of you for all the things you've done, Miss International Algorithm. Really, I don't mean that to belittle what you've done, because it's really quite incredible, and I'm very proud of you.
Thank you.
Oh,
thank you.
Thank you. And Andrea said, thank you so much for this. Super inspiring to see a successful story of an SLP small business owner. So thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you again. If you have indicated that you are part of the ASHA registry and entered both your ASHA number and a complete address in your account profile prior to the course completion, we will submit earned CEUs to ASHA. Please allow 1 to 2 months from the completion date for your CEUs to be reflected on your ASHA transcript. Each episode comes with an accompanying audio course on speechtherapypd.com, available for a 0.1 ASHA CEU. And just for our listeners, get $20 off any subscription with promo code BRAINSTORMS20. SpeechTherapyPD.com is run by SLPs for SLPs. We've got the largest library of ASHA CEU eligible courses out there, adding fresh content every week. Remember, use Brainstorms20 to get $20 off access to over 1,000 courses for an entire year. Head over to SpeechTherapyPD.com for more information and start earning CEs today. Thanks for tuning in to Brainstorms, Functional Neuro Rehab for SLPs. And don't forget, SpeechTherapyPD.com is your go-to for all things ASHA CEUs. Your positive reviews and support mean the world to us. We'd love for you to drop us a quick review and hit that follow button.